Hello everybody, it's time once again for that time everybody loves, Release Candidate Time! This is my new program, which I've been working on for the past like 3 or 4 months. I've actually been working on it for like a year. Just recently I've made it into a smaller, more user-friendly version of what it was before. It used to be just this command line thing that I would run every once in a while. But it's called Looper Trimmer, and what it does is it takes files that I make for my Looper program, and it trims each little event into a separate file. If it's a 5-second event, it'll trim it to a 5-second file, and then, so if you have like an hour's worth of footage and you just want to trim it to like 30 seconds or 40 seconds or whatever worth of events, it saves those files as individual smaller files, but without losing any quality because it trims it losslessly. So let me just, to give a demonstration here, let me load a squirrel recording that I had recorded earlier in the year. Like, see, these are all very, very long recordings. Like, that's 19 gigs. This one's 11 gigs, so let me just load one of them, 19 gigs. And I'm just making the looper file now, so take this off. I'm just going to make a few points here, make a few events. Okay, this one here, make one here. So right now I have 6 different loops from 2 different files, and I want to take this looper file. Let me make a looper file out of this. Call it squirrels squeeze. So I save the looper file, close this. And now Looper Trimmer takes that looper file and makes each of those events into individual files. So when you start Trimmer for the very first time, you get this message because it needs to know where FFmpeg is. So if you don't have FFmpeg, you can install it from this address here. You want to install, depending on whether you have a 32-bit version or 64-bit version, install the static version. When you do that, you'll get a 7z file, which you need 7-zip to use to extract it. But just doing this completely from the beginning. Okay, so there's the file. So uncompress it. Extract files. Let me extract it to the desktop. Just like start completely from the beginning. Okay, so I'm gonna extract the FFmpeg. So it extracts the folders, and what you're looking for is in the bin directory for binary. There's a file called FFmpegX, right there. Bin, that one, FFmpegX. So click on this little open directory, open file prompt here. Find the file FFmpeg that you installed, FFmpegX. So once that's filled in, you hit OK. Okay, now this is the main interface for Looper Trimmer. Use this to actually load the looper file that we made earlier. Okay, there are the points there. Event name, in and out points, handles, which I'll explain in a second, media files, those are the actual files it's trimming from, and then this is the method it's using to trim it. There's 3 different methods that I have set up for Looper, and I'll explain that later too. But for right now, let me just actually extract it. There's a test directory, or test directory. That'll be where the destination is. So squeeze looper, and that's the test directory it extracts to. Everything's set up. You hit submit job, and it trims each file one at a time. Now, depending on how large the file is, because these ones were like 25, 30-minute files, some of them are even hours long, it takes a little time to trim the actual file. Usually it's not this fast, or not this slow if it's just a bunch of like random short files, but if you have long, like 30-minute, hour-long shows that you're trimming, it might take a little bit of time. Okay, so it did that one. So you did it one at a time. And I did, FFmpeg, has a way to quickly search and find files, but for some reason it doesn't work very well with Looper, so I use the slow method, which takes longer, but it's a lot more accurate. At least I found it is. So see, it took the long 12 gig file, or 2416, let's see, top shot. I took this 19 gig file and trimmed it to these 2 smaller files, which are much, much smaller, like file size. So it took the same files out of this and out of 2.5 bottom shot, these 2 files here, which combined have 24 gigs, and trimmed it to this small little like 300 meg version of itself. Another thing Looper Trimmer does is it creates a new file with the trimmed events, which means it takes the new files referenced by the original looper file and puts them in instead of the original file. So this entire thing is all you know, you could like throw this on a flash drive or whatever. It's all self-packaged. And there's the loop here from earlier, from the bigger file. It trimmed the file to a smaller version of it, losslessly, so it didn't lose any quality or anything. Every single event that was in the original looper file is in this one. Each is an individual file on its own. There's that. Granted, I didn't really choose the best examples here. I just kind of quickly went through a bunch of points. But that's basically the gist of it. It takes a bunch of in and out points that you made earlier in a looper file and trims them down to smaller versions of that file. So that's that. A little more about this here. Handles are in and out point extensions on either side of the in and out point. And I have that because certain codecs need more to work with in order to loop properly. So by default, everything has 2 seconds of handles, which means if it's 237, like an endpoint here, it'll actually jump back to 235. At 239, it'll jump to 241. So the actual in and out points that it clips when it goes through FFmpeg is 235, 241. And then the actual loop is the same points that are here. So the loop from the new file will be exactly the same as the original loop. It's just there's extra media on either side to work with. And if you want to make that longer, like if a certain one doesn't work, you can make it 2, 3, 4, or 5 seconds. And that will, you can change each of these individually. You can change a bunch of them at once. So this one is 2, 5, 3, 5, 1, and 2. And then you can change all of them back if you want to do it like that. And that basically comes from an old editing technique. Final Cut used to do it, where if you were trimming down a major massive project from a bunch of old source files to this little tiny packetized version, it would put handles on either side of the media so that, you know, effects and, you know, keyframing and stuff like that would work with the smaller packagized version without needing the original source files. So that's technically what this is doing. The destination codec, I have 2 major ones. Trim losslessly takes whichever format the original video is in and makes a smaller version of that kind of format. So if it's like a MKV, Matroska, MP4, AVI, MOV, it makes a different, smaller version of that exact format. I also have Perez, which is a much bigger file. You know, it's a much larger file, but every single frame is independent from the other frames. One way to show what I'm talking about with that is load the test file I always use, bird and test looper, that I've used in other demonstrations for my looper program. Now most of these files aren't found because I moved to a different directory. That's another thing Trimmer will do. If you don't have the file, it'll just say file not found, and it'll skip that one. But anyway, these 3 things here. So these 3 ones will clip from the bigger file. Once again, this is a long one, so it'll take a little bit of time. Let me delete the files I had from before. So we'll trim these 3, and then it'll skip all these ones. Now these are trimming as trimming losslessly, which means once again it'll just make smaller versions of the original file. Okay, that one's done. Yeah, I probably should have chosen in and out points that are a lot closer to the beginning of the file, so it wouldn't take as long to trim, but I didn't. So every single time one of these finishes, and you do have the option here to create the new looper file, once it's done trimming, it will put a new line in this new looper file. So it adds events one at a time. Okay, so now these 3 are done. This file also is a 9 or 10 gig file originally. I trimmed it down to about 70 or 80 megs. Okay, so these are the 3 events from that original file. And you can see it's not the most smooth loop, just because technically MP4 files like this one have something that's called a group of pictures. It starts with an iframe, which is basically a complete rendered frame, and then it has other frames that are called P and B frames, which are predictional frames, which basically means it builds a complete frame every maybe like 2 or 3 seconds, depending on the settings you use. And then between those 2 seconds, to reduce the amount of space, it will mathematically try to figure out what parts of the picture are changing. So it'll make like this is a full picture, and then the next picture will be like, you know, this grass over here changes, this changes a little bit, he moves a little. That's how the compression works. But the disadvantage of that is when you try to loop a specific point, if it doesn't start in the very beginning of a group of pictures, it gives you that delay. You know, right there, the delay there. This is another good reason for handles, because see, like the group of pictures in this file is so far back, it doesn't there's no easy way to get back to it without, having that delay. But, and let me just do the one. Let me change this to ProRes. ProRes takes a little bit longer. What ProRes does is it's what's called an I-based codec. And this here is, once you've already run the job and you tell it to submit it again, it'll give you the prompt that says, you've already completed this, would you like to resubmit it? If you say no, it does nothing. If you say yes, it starts from the beginning again. So this is converting that same first event here to ProRes. This will take a lot longer. Not a lot longer, but, probably about twice as long. And I don't know why it does, because it's still searching the same exact point in the file. So it's just something about ProRes takes longer. But once it's done, you'll see why ProRes, even though it takes more space, is a good solution for some loops that don't play perfectly when you trim them down. Alright, now as this is going, let me talk about a few other things. Looper trimmer can use FFmpeg, which is the main thing it uses to trim, but it also has TS-Muxer capability. And the reason I put that in is because, for some reason, FFmpeg cannot handle AVC-HD like camcorder files that have date and time subtitle data as part of the file. For some reason, it just does not know how to copy that. I tried it like 8 different ways, and it does not know how to do it, but TS-Muxer can. So there are ways you can use TS-Muxer with AVC-HD files if you have it installed. So let me do that here. Okay, so now TS-Muxer is installed. Save changes. And then when you have a file, it has to be an MTS or an M2TS file. You can also click on this and go transcode, and there'll be a third option that says trim losslessly TS-Muxer. It will only work, because that's the way I coded it, with MTS and M2TS files. Oh, there we go. Now it's doing it. It does take a little bit of time. Okay, so I don't want to change this. If you have an event that already exists, like a file already exists from a previous trim, you can say, I don't want to overwrite it, or you can overwrite it. Okay, so now we're done again. First one, see, it takes up much more space. It's tenfold from the original one. But when you loop it, you can choose any point you want, because every single frame is independent from the last frame. So literally, you can choose any points. You don't have to wait for the group of pictures to start over, because every frame is its own group of pictures. 1 and 2 and 3 is separate, compared to like an MP4 file where like 1 to 20 would be one group, 21 to 28 or 48 would be another one. Every file is different. But transcoding it to ProRes, even though it takes longer, takes more space, is a lot more. You have a lot more finesse with actually making the loop. So I can do like this if I want. It's much more. It's just a lot more functional. Not functional, but a lot more smooth, let's just say. Okay, so yeah, this one's MP4. Which that one was actually right on the group of pictures, so that one's not going to be that much of an issue. It depends on every single loop. Every single one of them is different, which is why when I do have the thing to delete, it gives you this message that says, make sure you check everything first. Okay, so there's a squirrel. That's that loop. Okay, so trim those 3 things down to that. Quit Media Player Classic, yes. Okay, let me do the recycle one. I have another test folder, right here, with a bunch of files that I recorded of our cat jumping around. These are all source files. And in this demonstration that I made here, it doesn't use all these files, and it has a few that aren't referenced. So like it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 12, 13, even though there's it's dated 1 to 20 or numbered, whatever. And these 3 files are gone. So in this test, it'll trim these files with FFmpeg. I don't think there are any here that are MTS file. Oh, this one's an MTS file. So I can go, since it is an MTS file, you can go TS-Muxer. Only files that are MTS or M2TS can do that. And if you have a bunch that are different kinds, you'll get an error message. See, these ones aren't MTS, so you can't do it. This one is, but this one isn't. So the option's there, but it will only change the bottom one because, Looper trimmer has support for MTS and M2TS files, but not the original, which is an MP4. So, you can change it individually, item-wise. Do that. Whatever works best for the situation you're using. Alright, so now with this demonstration, I have these 16 events. 13 of them are actually valid because these files aren't around. I have it set to create a new looper file when it's done, or as it's going, and I also have it set to recycle the original files. That's usually useful if you have if you're trimming an hour and a half long interview and you only want like a few 5-minute chunks, and then you want to delete the original file to save space. So it'll trim the events to the smaller files, and then it will recycle it when it's done doing that. These 3 go to FFmpeg, these 2 go to TS-Muxer, and then these are FFmpeg again. So, run the job. One at a time. That's TS-Muxer here. Skip those, doing these ones. Now see, these ones are a lot closer to the beginning of the file, so they're a lot quicker. Okay, everything's trimmed. This is the trimmed files, which is different from the original. And then you get this error, not error message, this prompt. Looper file contains 13 unique source files, or you should want to recycle the original files. When you hit yes, it gets rid of them. 13 files were sent to the recycle bin. Now those files are actually in the recycle bin. And the reason I did recycle bin instead of just deleting them is because, you know, just in case you wanted them to come back, you could still do restore and have them put back. I wanted to give that extra, like, security blanket there. So if you did want the file, you went, oh crap, and you wanted the file again, you could go back and retrieve it. Okay, once you tell it that you want to delete everything, everything comes up as source file recycled, and you can't resubmit. Okay, you can't resubmit because there's no files. However, if you open it again, you'll get that message. Everything will come up as file not found. And when absolutely nothing is found, you know, it will literally, if you have the thing set to recycle still, and you submit it, it will say looper file has no source files to delete because everything's gone, so no files were sent to the recycle bin. So it skips all of them, gives you that error message, and then you're here again. You can resubmit. It wouldn't do you any good because there's no files. So that was mainly the thing that took so long for me to write, was all the error handling. You know, error handling if a file is a certain kind, error handling if there's a file that's not there, counting a file that's not there as not being part of the files to delete, you know, all these little tiny little things. That's what took me so long to like tweak every little part of it. But that's basically the gist of it. It takes a looper file, makes a smaller version of that looper file, completely lossless. It does not lose any quality. They're the exact same things. They're just smaller version of the same things, unless you choose ProRes. You can have extra slack on either side of the file for each single one of them to make sure that you have enough to play it, and you can change ProRes, TS-Muxer, FFmpeg, and all that stuff. So that's pretty much the gist of the program. Run it, get a file, give it a file. Let me just make a new one here. Da-da-da-da. Select that, and submit. And that's basically it.